Okay. Hello and welcome to Kylemore. Welcome to the Notre Dame Book Club. We are in week 3 of our 5th series, To Hell or to Connacht, Stories of Irish Resilience. And this is seen through the lens of rugby. My name is Lisa Caulfield, and I'm the academic director of the Notre Dame Center here in Kylemore. And it really is a great pleasure to welcome you all again. And for all those loyal book club participants, a sincere thank you for joining us on this 5th season. I really want to thank you for participating and building the community that we've managed to do over the last few weeks. We have still, our numbers are growing with over 1,300 now registered participants on all of the continents and representing 27 countries from around the world. So it's really wonderful to have such a representation. And it's also wonderful to see the amount of hits the videos are getting after we post them online. So I want to quickly thank the sponsors of the Kylemore Book Club, as is our custom. They have made this a reality, and without Notre Dame International, the Keogh Naughton Institute for Irish Studies, the College of Arts and Letters, the Keogh School of Global Affairs, Notre Dame Learning, and the Notre Dame Rugby, and Connacht Rugby, and least but not least at all is Notre Dame Alumni Association, who sponsored the Think ND platform. We will have breakouts, as is our normal custom. That will be at the end of the session, which is at the end of the hour, which will have an 8 to 10 minute breakout session in which you'll get to meet other people in the book club and share your experiences of this week's session and this week's conversation that we're having. I also encourage you to use the Google form that we are putting into the chat function. This is a form that will direct the questions to our panelists, and that will help me coordinate my own questions. So if you could please put the form into the chat function, Zoe, that'd be great. And if anyone has a question for our panelists, then I'll be asking on your behalf. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. My co-host is Justin Hickey, who is the coach for the Notre Dame football team, or excuse me, the Notre Dame rugby team. We were talking about football and how it's being back to normal, so I have football on my mind, Justin, but you're warmly welcome this afternoon. And I'd like to also welcome Eamonn Molloy, who is of Connacht Rugby, who's been so instrumental in getting this series off the ground. He's an alumni of our program, and he's been a key proponent in getting this series off the ground. Now, they'll be my co-hosts in helping me direct some of the questions to our guests. This is week 3, which we've entitled Trailblazers, Breaking Gender Boundaries. And we have 2 distinguished guests here who will join in the conversation that we've been having over the last couple weeks. I'd like to start off with Heneghan, who will be joining us today. She's the principal and owner of Heneghan Associates Solicitors. She is a native of Partry in County Mayo and started her career in Mayo and has had a keen interest in rugby throughout the years and has undertaken a training workshop and is also a judicial officer with World Rugby. She can adjudicate on cases involving the Pro 14, the Champions Cup, and Challenge Cup and World Rugby. After being involved with Connacht Rugby for over 30 years as a club delegate, secretary to the Connacht junior team, and member of the chair of disciplinary, and was selected to be junior vice president in 2018 and 2019 season, and in 2021 assumed the role of president of Connacht Rugby, and is the first woman to hold this position in Ireland in 135 years of Connacht Rugby. It's now my distinct honor to also welcome from, I believe, Georgia at the moment, en route to her home, is Phaidra Knight. And Phaidra is an athlete, sports, media talent, motivational speaker, and business entrepreneur. For nearly 18 years, Phaidra traveled the globe as a professional rugby player, establishing herself as one of the premier players in the sport. She made 3 appearances in the Rugby World Cup, and was selected as the top player in the world in her position in 2002 and in 2006. In 2010, she was named the U.S. Rugby Player of the Decade. And in November of 2017, she became the first and only Black American inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame. The former attorney is on the board of directors for USA Rugby, for the USA Rugby Board, and the board of trustees for the Women's Sports Foundation, WSF. She also serves as the WSF president and has founded Peak Unleashed in 2019, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the personal and physical development of marginalized youth through educational support through rugby and yoga, particularly those of incarcerated and exploited populations. She is a keynote speaker and has an expansive television dimension to her dynamic career, and her on-air sports broadcast experience includes sideline reporting, in-booth commentating, and studio analysis. She has recently launched her clothing line, the PSK Collective, in August of 2020. Phaidra, thank you for joining us via your vehicle this afternoon. Okay, I'm going to start with a few questions, and I'll start with Anne. Anne, please describe your relationship with the sport of rugby. We understand that it's been a 30-year sort of love affair with rugby, but how has it changed throughout the years, up to including your time as being appointed the president of Connacht Rugby? And what did that mean to you in the context of your life?
I became involved in rugby. I suppose I'm slightly different from people that are involved nowadays in that they would have played rugby. But when my interest came from a family background, I have 4 brothers, 3 of them played, and my dad was a big rugby fan as well. So from an early age, I was going to the games with them and just really enjoying the game. And I suppose my interest grew over the years from there. When I first became involved, there wouldn't have been that many women involved in kind of the administrative side. But having been to a regular on the sidelines, you get to know a lot of the people involved. So going to, joining the Connacht branch as a delegate for my original club, Ballinrobe, it wasn't as daunting, I suppose, as it might have been, because I knew quite a few of the faces already in the room. And I suppose things just kind of spiraled a bit from there. Early on, I would have been just involved as a club delegate, which was going to monthly meetings and bringing back the details of what was happening in Connacht to the club. I took some time out to start my business. And then when I got back involved with Connacht again, I chaired their disciplinary committee, which if anybody gets sent off during a game, we decide how many weeks or how much of a suspension they're going to have. The whole presidency thing came, to be honest, completely out of the blue. It was something I never thought of, never anticipated. And when I got the phone call asking would I be interested, my first reaction was total shock and surprise. Once it sunk in, obviously I was highly honoured, and it's a huge honour, not just to be the first woman in Ireland to do this, but for Connacht to be the first province to actually make this happen, to allow a situation or foster the community in a way that a woman can get to this level. So it's been fantastic. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, and last year, obviously with COVID, it wasn't a normal year as president. So I'm having 2 years to make up for that. So I'm going to be president in the next season as well. So hopefully things will be more normal then. That's kind of a potted history, if you like, of how I've ended up where I am.
And I suppose, if you don't mind me coming in there, Lisa, I heard you speak before about, when you were in your club in Ballinrobe, and obviously there's many male administrators, and they were almost waiting their turn to be president. At what point did you kind of, before assuming they're all think, why not me? Like you were, as you said, you were side by side with them, a lifetime's involvement, and in the same role, seeing the same faces. as I said, some of the men in the club would probably think almost waiting their turn to assume the vice presidency or the presidency, or even move on to Connacht ranks. At what point did you think, well, this is something I'd like, or this door is open to me as well?
To be honest, Eamonn, I didn't. I was enjoying my time with Connacht. I enjoyed the disciplinary committee. I joined that just as a committee member to start with, and after I think 3 years took over the chairmanship of that. I kind of branched out a little bit with that as well. Through World Rugby, I became a judicial officer first with the IRFU, and then took training with World Rugby to move on from there. But the whole presidency was a complete shock. It wasn't something, and it wasn't a situation where I thought, well, a woman has never done this, so no, a woman can never do it. It was more, I never even saw it on my future agenda at all. It wasn't something that I'd aspired to. As you say, a lot of men who've been involved in the club for years, or involved with Connacht Rugby for years, would think, well, I've done my time. It's my chance now to assume the presidency. So the one thing that I hope by my being president now is that it's going to be something that women in the future who are involved in these type of roles would say, yeah, now it's my turn. I want to be president as well, and there's absolutely no reason why they can't be. Already in Connacht, we've got quite a few female presidents of clubs coming through in the next year or two, and it's fantastic to see. I suppose rugby has been so male orientated that it's not that women have been discriminated against, it's that women, I think, we're our own worst enemies in some ways, and that we haven't seen these roles for ourselves, and haven't seen the prospect of presidency or different higher roles in our futures, and now that's changing. I think by my getting so much publicity by being the first woman and being from Connacht, it's given Connacht a huge boost. And I love doing stuff like this, because you'll always get somebody afterwards who comes back and says, God, I never even thought this was something I could do, but this is great. It's something I can aspire to now. And I know Bavin has mentioned that she finds it hard to be a role model, but you do have to kind of put your insecurities aside and think, if this is going to help other people to promote themselves and gain confidence, then I think it's fantastic.
And can you talk a little bit about the responsibilities that you have in the role as president, and just how vital the board and other volunteers are to Connacht Rugby?
Sure, Justin. I suppose the easiest way to describe my role is, the person who puts on the blazer and represents Connacht, whether that's at, rugby games, or hosting, visiting clubs, traveling to away clubs. Obviously, I haven't had that experience this year, but that would be the normal route that a president would take. It's down to things as sad as going to funerals, to make sure that somebody who's given a lifelong commitment to rugby is recognised. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do that either. But also it's about getting to all of the clubs throughout the province, so that the people who are involved, we have volunteers in Connacht who have been involved for 40, 50 years. Those guys are still there. And it's just to get out to those clubs and meet those people and just thank them again for everything that they do, because a lot of that goes unrecognised. These are the people in their clubs who are making sure that the jerseys go to the cleaners. They're ready for the players. The dressing rooms are clean. The pitches are outlined. Those are all the kind of things that players, I suppose, take for granted. And as president, it's important to just go and thank these people for all of that work that they do. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to. Hopefully in the coming season, our games have just recommenced now last week. So all going well, you know, I'm looking forward to getting to games and getting out to schools games and, you know, presenting club cups, presenting medals to players who've, you know, given everything on the pitch. You know, those are the enjoyable parts of the presidency and the parts that I'm looking forward to. You know, this year has been mainly online Zoom and Teams meetings, but, you know, it'll be good to get back to some sort of normality now in September.
And I had just a question for you, because you mentioned it being for being particular to Connacht. I wonder, do you feel the role that you were able to achieve in Connacht for being the president, is it the moment make it the person, or was it the environment make it? Like, do you feel that it's Connacht versus other provinces don't have this, you know, female president, and yet Connacht is able to be the first? How does that resonate for you? I know you're a male woman, but do you think it's particular to the West? Is it something in about Connacht, or is it sort of how you see it as your sort of lifetime dedication and your involvement with the sport that's brought you to it? How would you describe perhaps the sort of province and your role in it?
I think, Lisa, it probably is peculiar to Connacht because it's a smaller province. You know, we've had to fight for everything that we've achieved. I mean, a number of years ago, Connacht, there was talks of Connacht being disbanded, and that pulled everybody together. There was a march in Dublin. You know, everybody wanted to be a Connacht person on that day, and thankfully, you know, minds were changed, and Connacht now shares an equal role with the other 4 provinces. I think because we are such a small province, it's not the old Irish adage, you know, that everybody knows everybody else, but we know one another a lot better, I think, in Connacht. You know the people that are involved. People know those that are involved in the Connacht branch, because it's a small group of people. You know, it's not as vast as, say, Leinster, who've got, you know, huge amount of people involved, or even Munster and Ulster. Connacht is a more tight-knit community, and I suppose because of that, it was easier for me in my different roles with Connacht Rugby, you know, for somebody to, I suppose, see me and say, well, maybe there's somebody who might make a president someday. You know, in other provinces, you know, I might have been overlooked. I suppose that's the only way, really. I mean, Connacht is all about fostering talent. You know, we have this thing about, you know, green shoots, you know, and encouraging players and encouraging people to follow right through to be the best that they can be in Connacht. And I think it is, I think it's something unique in Connacht. And we've been lucky in that nearly every coach who we've had has bought into this idea and has embraced the fans in a way, I think, that doesn't happen in the bigger provinces. I don't know, with Pat Lamb, who was our coach before Andy Friend, he embraced this whole idea of all the counties in Connacht being part of Connacht Rugby. It wasn't just Galway, because that's where we play our games. You know, all of the other counties are involved, and all of a sudden you have players going out to schools and clubs, and a couple of players were dedicated to each club. So suddenly you had 9-10-year-old kids seeing somebody maybe coming from their own club and playing with Connacht. So everything became much easier. You know, no more than myself, it's, you know, hoping that women will see me and say, well, I can do this. It's been the same thing with players coming through. They're looking at these guys and saying, you know, this is great. You know, this is like John Muldoon from down the road, who went on to have a phenomenal career with Connacht and now has a great coaching career. I think that's the uniqueness of Connacht. I think it's our smallness, if you like, but it's the heart, I think, that's in Connacht, you know, and fans and the team play such a huge part, and are inextricably linked, I think. You know, the players walk down the street in Galway and there's no fuss about them, but people will just wave and say hello, and they know a lot of the fans' faces at this stage. So it's something special, I think, that we have in the West. Yeah, I think it is, Lisa.
Do you feel, and that you mentioned there that fight for survival, and it's a long time in the past now, but it's also was a very defining moment and is still fresh in memories. But what do you feel since that point, Connacht created its own path, that there was a level of conformity and even uniform amongst the four provinces? And whether it was that moment or another moment or the success of in the Pro 12, it seems Connacht now has decided, well, we're part of the RFU and we're part of the establishment, but we need to create our own path and our own identity, and making their own decisions, whether it be the presidency or other decisions, as part of that.
I think that's very, very much what happened, Eamonn. I think that was the defining point for Connacht. Because up to then we had just, I suppose, accepted everything that had been given to us, and we're thankful for everything. And then it was almost like we were going to be wiped out with the stroke of a pen, because the budgets didn't balance. And we decided then, well, hang on a second, Connacht is important. We're going to make sure that we survive. And when we did that, I think that strengthened us. I think we then gained our own identity. We became Connacht Rugby, if you like, rather than just one of the four provinces. And I think that's what's brought us then from strength to strength.
And I had another follow-up question, just because I saw from an interview that you wrote about how much, how important the volunteers are in Connacht Rugby. I just wanted to, if you could further elaborate about the volunteers and what kind of role they play in Connacht Rugby, and how much does Connacht Rugby rely on volunteers?
Connacht Rugby relies hugely on volunteers. In all of our clubs, like Connacht Rugby itself is a professional setup. We've got our professional, we've got our employees, we've got our professional team. But the teams that make up Connacht Rugby as a province, they run on volunteers. The volunteers are the people who, as I say, make sure the jerseys are washed, make sure the grass is being cut, the pitch is being lined. There's dressing rooms available for visiting teams, for the referee. There's somebody there when a game starts. Like all of the domestic game is amateur, and these people are the lifeblood of that. There's somebody who, when a game starts, will meet the referee, introduce themselves to them, show them where his dressing room is, introduce the captains, make sure everything is as it should be. You've got the people who do the flags on the sideline. They're usually club members. They're all volunteers. You've got the ladies afterwards, and unfortunately it does tend to be ladies who do the tea and the sandwiches or the foods. These are wives and girlfriends who, because their husbands or partners are involved in the game, they're happy to help out. So the volunteers are vital. The game couldn't continue without the volunteers, and even the players themselves. As I said, the clubs are amateur, so these are players who have normal lives, normal jobs, normal home commitments, and they're giving up their time 2 or 3 evenings a week to go training, and either their Friday night or their Sunday to go and play a game. So yeah, it's hugely important, and that's why, if every chance we get, we do try and recognise volunteers and how much of a part that they play.
I was going to say, it is such a grassroots, and we forget how much of a grassroots organization it is, and even though it has professional status now. I'm sorry, Justin, I cut you off. It looks like we were going to say.
That's okay. And you mentioned a little bit how the sport of rugby and the history in Ireland especially can be so male dominated, and particularly at the leadership level. And I know you haven't been able to get out and travel much yet, or get too involved at some of the away matches or events and such, but in what might be kind of seen as the gentleman's club among the presidents and other board leaders, how have you found that you've been received so far, and what's that dynamic been like?
It's been really good, Justin, because I suppose my first 2 years as junior vice president and then senior vice president, there were normal times. It was pre-COVID, so I've met my opposite numbers in the 4 provinces, and we regularly, when we're playing each other in interprovincials, we're texting back and over, and we're regularly emailing and keeping in touch over the past year. While we haven't been able to do anything else, but yeah, it's been good. I think because women haven't been involved so much more in sport now, and even in rugby itself, the under-18s, the women's team, all of those kind of things, I think, have helped normalize a female being in the room. And while I suppose I was the first one at this level, it was surprising how easy it was, how readily accepted that it was. I think part of that was possibly I've earned my dues. Anybody that knows me or knows my background knows that I've been involved in rugby for the last 30 odd years at different levels. I would have hated to come into this position just as the person who's there to tick a box. Let's have the first female president. Just to do that, and just to show that Connacht can do that. But I suppose the fact that I've earned my stripes and gotten to the position that I'm in, it's made it easier. People know me and know that I have put in the years and have put in the time. So it's been easy, and it's been a comfortable process. So I'm looking forward to the next season as well.
And it's probably, it seems like a pivotal moment or a pivotal period. And as you said, it's very about your own career outside of rugby highlights the background which made you suitable for disciplinary committees and roles within World Rugby. But we just had the announcement as well that TG Cahir is going to cover the women's Interpro series again for the first time, probably long overdue, but it is the first time. Connacht has recently, I suppose, even since we were setting up this webinar they've appointed the first woman to the IRFU committee. They're Connacht's first delegate to the IRFU committee. So I suppose, is there anything that makes this moment pivotal? And would you have any message for young girls or women, whether they're in administration, whether they're in coaching, or even in a playing sense, to emulate some of their male peers?
Absolutely. I think it's so important to encourage people. I mean, that's what it's all about. I think so often you'll often hear the scenario, if you've got a man and a woman going for an interview, the man will naturally assume that he's going to get the job. The woman is doubting herself from the moment she's walking in the door. And I think by having more women involved at these kind of levels, it becomes normal. And I think then that younger girls don't doubt themselves as much. You see people like Baby, being catapulted. I mean, I at the time I was junior vice president, and I saw her play on the under-18s Connacht team, who won the series that year, and she was just standout. She was earmarked straight away. She was whisked off into the professional level, and I think her head didn't stop spinning for maybe 6 months. But that's how acceptable and how possible it is now. If you've got the talent, whether it's on the pitch or whether it's in the boardroom or putting on the blazer or but taking a role with the RFU, I think it's easier now, and I think more women are going to look at it and not doubt themselves and think, yeah, like I can do this and put themselves forward much more for that. And I think that's one of the best things, I think, from my presidency. And it's something that's been most encouraging. You do get messages from people kind of saying, even different sports. I've done something similar to this with people who are doing leadership course with various different sports in Ireland. And like that, afterwards, they were all coming back going, yeah, why can't I go for that role? And now, now I'm going to go for the role that I was just going to accept being secretary, but now I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for a higher role. And that's the fantastic thing, I think, that people like myself can do, just make it more normal. Not something that you aspire to, but something that you can get and you should get.
I don't think it's a coincidence, though. I find it very fascinating that we have two, an attorney and a lawyer on the phone call as our representatives, and you run your own practice too in Mayo. So, and Phaidra, you were trained as an attorney, so it's very interesting that we have two people who are heavily so involved in rugby and also in their day job you have a full-time practice and running your offices. I was going to ask Phaidra just to come in here now and maybe talk a bit about what rugby is like in the US and how prevalent is female leadership in rugby in the US, and your experience and what has been your own, to talk from your own experience of your leadership in rugby and how perhaps your training as an attorney has informed you yourself on how you are on the pitch.
Rugby, women's rugby in the US, obviously everything in the world took a halting stop with the pandemic. So we're still trying to wake up a bit from that. Obviously, the Olympics was pretty spectacular for the world and sport in general. But yeah, we are in a position, I think, where we're forecasting by 2025, and I don't think this is just the US, I think this is a global statistic of 40 to 45% of the rugby playing population will be women. And so that number is consistent, I think, within the US in terms of the growth of the game. Right now, I think it's a little difficult to know and to gauge where we are in reaching that number in the next 4 years because of the pandemic and everything being sort of halted still. But there's certainly a tremendous amount of interest. I actually had a conversation just yesterday with the legendary Kathy Flores, who's a former U.S. Women's coach and 1991 World Cup winner. And she's at Brown University, which is obviously one of the Ivy Leagues. And she was speaking about her incoming recruits and how she has a number of different players who actually have rugby experience, which has not been the typical norm for her in her program there. So that's a good indicator, right? It's an indicator that the game is being played at the high school level, and even prior to that, amongst youth in general, and girls are playing the game and getting involved. So that's a great sign. And I don't think that's a random isolated situation. I'm hearing that from other coaches around the country, that they're getting players with more experience at the collegiate level at the end, at the start of their collegiate careers. And so that's only going to help, build the grassroots game. It's only going to help build the high performance game. And it will continue to grow, I guess, at both ends, from both ends of the spectrum. You may have to sprinkle your questions in again. I think that probably covers the first one.
Yeah, no, and just talk a bit about your own experience of how you got into rugby yourself, and
Sure.
how you've taken it to such an elite level, and what was the kind of your peers and family reaction to being so passionate about rugby?
Yeah, I started playing rugby in my the end of my first year of law school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I had never heard of the sport. I didn't know what it was. Growing up, I was just an athlete. I was playing basketball as early as 5. And I had always had this dream of being a world-class athlete. And at that time, the only vision that I had was basketball, but I really didn't have that because at that time there wasn't, it was 1979. So there weren't any like obvious women playing professional sports or professional basketball at the time. But I found my inspiration in watching the men play, right? And so I had this vision at a very early age to be, great in a sport. When obviously, in reality, it became another sport. But nevertheless, I persevered through high school as an athlete. I went to college, got to undergrad, and I actually didn't play basketball in undergrad because I was just a bit burned out and I wanted to focus on my academics and working and, starting basically the inroads into being a lawyer. And so when I reached law school and discovered that I didn't really want to be a lawyer anymore, and that I needed balance in order to get through that 3-year process, which was quite grueling for me. I started to look to sort of a balancing act, and it just so happened I thought it was going to be basketball again because at that time I think I was probably 6 months into law school. I was actually training to walk onto the Wisconsin Badgers basketball team. And it was at a law school party that I met a young lady who was a member of the Wisconsin rugby team, and she invited me out to a training. And I followed through. She sold me on the fact that I could tackle, and that the game was similar to basketball, but similar to soccer. And so that it was intriguing enough to pull me out. And I never looked back from that point. I went out to a training that following week and instantly fell in love with the game. And just, it all, started there and grew from there. So about 2 years into, playing, I was brought on to the U.S. women's team. I made the U.S. women's team. And it was from that point to 2017 that I, was immersed in the game as a player. But it was a wonderful experience. It was probably the most accepting group of people I had encountered up to that point in my life. And I think that was probably the biggest selling point for me. I grew up in a small town in middle Georgia, very rural, very stereotypical of what you would think when you think about the South. And so it was, what that rugby team offered me was, really a fresh breath of air. And with all of the acceptance and of diversity and just different, very different approach to everything I had been accustomed to. And so I latched on, and the bonus was that I was able to go out and be a wrecking ball on the pitch, and just have fun. So that's essentially where I started, and I think I was probably a bit before my time with my approach to the game, but it certainly has shown to have caught up at this point. I took a very high performance approach from the beginning. I took the sport, and I've dubbed myself as a professional rugby player because I've always treated it that way. I have devoted it my time and attention and focus to it, or when I was playing as a full-time, employee of the game, and and so that's the way I approached it. I'm very happy to have approached it that way. And yeah, it brought many benefits and great things to me. And hopefully I have brought some great things to the sport, and, we'll continue that through my retirement from playing.
Phaidra,
Phaidra, you're
sorry, Justin.
Go ahead, Eamonn.
Phaidra, it's Eamonn here. Just one thing you mentioned there is a friend of yours. You encountered a friend and they brought you along to training, and another lady we interviewed, Coma, from New York, had a similar story where, a friend of hers in college was going training and she went along. And would you find that story is replicated throughout rugby, that it's very much these social encounters that grow it? And it also seems like a sport that it's very open to people just walking in and trying it out, maybe more so than other sports.
Yeah, I think that's the narrative for most people, at least up to a certain age range. I think your younger generation are being introduced to the sport maybe slightly differently. Some through school, some through after-school programs, and then probably a handful or two through the social interaction vehicle. But yeah, I think the mass majority of older players, get introduced to it, through social interaction, and very similar to how Coma and I were brought into the game. I think that will be changing. Obviously, we had a lot of hopes, obviously, particularly on our men and women at the Olympics, but especially our women. Our women were expected to medal, and the hope was that we would be able to really hit the ground running with the PR buzz, to carry over and build the game. But I think we still have an equally, not quite the same identical opportunity, but an equally impactful opportunity to really grow the sport, and to engage sponsorship and support around the game from a commercial perspective that will help us elevate the message, and have a greater offering to folks all around to get involved. I think the exposure element is huge. So yeah, I think that most people come into it with that. And I think the going back to your question, what really keeps people engaged is that social element of the game. And I think that makes it unique to other sports. It's and we all know about it. Those who play the game and who are involved in a game, it's very special. There's a camaraderie there that you don't necessarily find in other sports. And I've actually taken on a different sport since playing rugby. I'm actually a training as a competitive mixed martial artist now, and even in the martial art community, it's special. Certainly, there's a bond there, but it's not the same. It doesn't carry the same tenor as what I've experienced in rugby. Again, I know that if I'm ever in any other country and I meet a rugby player, I have a place to stay forever, right? And vice versa. Like that is something that's very unique to this sport. And it's that one of those social perks of being in the sport of rugby. So I definitely think that's a unique factor that sets one of the things that sets it apart. That I love and that has kept me engaged for this long.
Well, Phaidra, your rise from just beginning to straight to the national team was obviously so rapid and impressive. And reflecting back, I know I've seen you play a few times. My playing career was somewhat parallel to yours. So I believe I saw you play in Saranac Lake, probably in the early 2000s. I think there was if it wasn't a test, it was, a USA v Canada A or something like that. And you were always very fun to watch. But can you think back about your experiences traveling the States as a player and around the globe as a national team player? how was women's rugby received in certain areas of the country, certain parts of the world? I know here our women's team is still very young, so we're constantly trying to change the perception. We're asked often, oh, do women play rugby? Do we have a team here? To where now it's just like you said, we're seeing recruits come here with experience, and we're seeing more and more I think just exposure to our women athletes and our women's team here, that it's starting to become more of a known quantity. But can you talk about how you experienced it then as a player, and what kind of changes you're seeing now?
Yeah, I mean, early in my career, and then this goes back to your question prior to, it was when I first started playing, my family had no idea what it was. The people, my friends, at least those back at home, had no idea what rugby was. And so my dad would often ask me, like, are you getting paid for this? Why are you putting so much time into this? Right. And, I just said, hey, I love it. I'm passionate about it. I think there's a huge opportunity for the sport and for me in this sport, in this country. And so I'm in it, and there were a lot of naysayers. Right. So even, in the same vein of what you just asked, right, there are lots of people early on in my career when I was traveling who didn't realize women played rugby. Right. And, it was, my teammates, we would just very matter of factly shut that down. Like, yeah, women play rugby. We're here. And we play it, as well as, if not maybe even a little better than the men from a technical perspective, because we, technically that's what women are known to be proficient at, is the technical aspects of the game, or at least at that time. And so it's certainly changed. People are a little bit more aware, and that's highly attributable to just visibility. However, it's not where it could be. It's not where it will be. But I think that the biggest piece is just getting rugby on television, right? It has to be seen. And, I've had there were a few obvious times that we were on. I think you referenced it, seeing me up in Saranac in the early 2000s. One of Oprah's networks did a special on the U.S. women's team, and they covered the U.S. Can-Am match. And so that provided a little bit of visibility. But again, just people just don't know. They didn't know, they don't know. And as you get into some of the more rural areas of the country that don't have rugby programs or even rugby teams, people just don't know what it is. Internationally, I traveled to rugby countries. So rugby was the queen, right? It was the queen bee. You had, obviously, Ireland. Everyone knew what rugby was because rugby's the main sport there. New Zealand, everyone knew what rugby was. Maybe Canada, not so much in certain areas at those times. But I was fortunate enough to, travel to countries that were rugby playing countries. So there was some awareness of the sport, and there was some awareness that women played the sport. But it wasn't as women's rugby was just not as notorious as men's. And so it's, the task before us is to just really continue to plug away and build the women's game. The men's game is, I feel like it's in a position where it's strong, right? And so now it's time to really dedicate some focus and time on building the women's game and bringing that exposure, that media, those commercial opportunities to the game to really make it, like I said, as was stated earlier, more the norm. Because women are playing rugby, they're going to play rugby. And in the US, quite honestly, the women have won a World Cup. And so, it's beyond time for that to happen. But there's certainly, even now, obviously I don't play rugby, and people, but I'm still involved as a broadcaster as a, more of a television personality in the sport and the pundit. People just they just don't. A lot of people don't know. I'm going to Georgia now, and there are people who just don't know anything about it. So it's we have our work cut out for us still here in the U.S. A lot of it. I think we're just getting started, but we've certainly come a bit of a ways since the infancy of my career. And I think we'll just continue to grow as we get more and more opportunities for the sport to be seen on more of a mainstream level.
Phaidra, I'm quite impressed by the numbers you mentioned there and the percentages that of women that play the game. And one of the, I suppose in Ireland, the context we're kind of growing from is traditionally there would have been kind of girls' games nearly and boys' games. If you go back 30, 40 years here, and hockey would have been seen as a girls' sport, and a lot of girls' schools would have adopted that. And then, so every other sport is growing the female game from that context. And soccer's made inroads now in the women's game, and women's Gaelic football is making inroads also. And rugby's probably also making those inroads, but probably still trying to change that perception from being a men's game over here to being a women's and a men's game. Is there anything in the US, I suppose, that makes rugby appealing to girls and women, that we could potentially tap into a bit more or highlight a bit more?
We have Girls Rugby, a nonprofit organization that is really sort of doing yeoman's work in the space of developing the game. That may be a good resource to tap into. I know through Peak Unleashed, which is the nonprofit that I founded in 2019, although we're using rugby as more of a vehicle of personal and physical development along with yoga. We are looking to reach a particular population of young people, young girls, typically very marginalized. We work with a lot of incarcerated youth at this point, or formerly incarcerated youth. But, there are, I think, vehicles. I know Atlas Foundation is another organization that's trying to get involved in the U.S. to get to raise the profile of the game. And then USA Rugby, obviously in the last couple of years has experienced a complete sort of overturn. And so, growing, starting to grow and develop that youth side is certainly something that's in the works. I think there are the appeal, I think, is and I think the way it works in these other sports you mentioned, like soccer and hockey, is, you look at basketball and hockey and soccer and golf and any other mainstream or sort of quasi-mainstream sport, kids look at the national team players or the professional leagues. Those are the people that they see and they aspire to be. And whether, regardless of gender, when young people can see this, even when older people can see this, then they can envision it for themselves. And so I think that the most important thing is really, there are a lot of most important things, but one of the main things in luring girls into playing the sport is that they have to see other women playing the sport. And we're not a society yet where, a girl can see a man and maybe see that her getting to that level. And maybe there are some out there, but that's not the majority. And so it's really raising the profile again at the commercial level, at the media level, and in having rugby, women's rugby, be reachable, that whether it's on television, whether it's through a digital platform, that's made easy and accessible. But that has to happen, right? And that was, we put so much here on the Olympics because, but it's only once every 4 years. And that's not enough. There's got to be more. And so it's refreshing to know we have a professional sevens league that's starting this fall that will be broadcast on Fox. So that's hopeful because there will be women and men playing in that professional league in sevens. But we just need more exposure, and I think that is the ticket to really breaking through. And being that lure, as you characterize it, for women, and girls in the sport of rugby here.
Phaidra, I wonder if we can spend the last couple minutes that we have before we break out, just to talk about your clothing line, PSK Collective. What motivated you to design it and create it, and how's it going?
Well, developing this line of clothing for female athletes, it was really a dream come true for me. And really what inspired it was a couple of things. I've been an athlete for most of my life, and I always found it very difficult to find activewear. I mean, really all clothes, but in this particular case, activewear that would fit me. I've always felt like I've had a strong build and a very athletic build and muscular build. And so it was always frustrating, even as a little girl, going in and trying on clothes. And so I, after, dealing with my own issues and then talking to other athletes, both female and male, and realizing that this is not just a Phaidra problem. This is a common problem amongst athletes. I decided to launch this clothing line in conjunction with my business partner, Zara Bahari. And it's going quite well. We are currently in Walmart and Kohl's, and we're expanding. We'll be expanding to have a more global presence in 2022 with a significant partner. Actually a couple of partners. And so the clothing line's going quite well. We launched in the midst of the quarantine, which most people said we were crazy to do, but we thought it was just a really important time, especially considering the social climate that we were experiencing here. I think both in the US and that the rest of the world felt very closely with all of the social justice topics coming into play. And so we launched it, and it turned out to be a great time to launch it. And we're looking to just grow and grow and grow. So it's going quite well. Thank you.
No, I can certainly attest to requiring better clothes for female athletes and having proper sizes that are available and the ease to work out with. So thank you for that initiative, and nothing better than women designing clothes for women.
Awesome.
We're here at the hour sort of end, and I just want to thank on behalf of my co-host here, Eamonn and Justin. I want to really sincerely thank Phaidra Knight and Heneghan for joining us today, and for the inspirational role models that they are for us all, really. And I know asking, random ask that we get to join a book club session for the Notre Dame Alumni Association comes as an odd request to some, but we're just so thank you for Anne and Phaidra for saying yes, and for contributing to the series in such a meaningful way. It truly is a distinguished honor to have you both on the call today, and know that you contributed to this book club series. I also want to acknowledge the contribution of Coma Gandhi Fishburne and Baby Parsons, who contributed to the videos for this week's session, and especially for Baby, for sharing so honestly with us about the difficulties of being a female role model and kind of her shying away from it. But I want to really thank her for contributing to the University of Notre Dame's series and for the Think ND platform. We really appreciate the stories that you all shared with us and your experiences of rugby, and clearly the passion and the GRA, which is Irish for love, has come out amongst all of the people who've participated today. So for the last 10 minutes, I'd like you to spend, if you'd like, it's optional into breakout sessions for the next few minutes. If you'd like to introduce yourselves to one another and share your location, and perhaps talk about, the conversation that we had and what struck you, and how it fits into the series. We of course expect the rules of civil discourse to apply, but we understand and we hope that you respect each other's comments. And we look forward to seeing you next week for our final session, where we bring it all home, I suppose, in the sense of our female students' experience of playing rugby at Notre Dame, and also an Irish traveling over to Notre Dame to play rugby too. So we have a great kind of closure to it, to the series next week. And for all of you who are interested in suggesting future topics, please feel free to do so through the ThinkND platform. Happy to oblige. So Zoe, if you don't mind, we'll be, again, it's totally up to you if you'd like to stay on. Zoe will be randomly putting you into smaller groups so that you can have a quiet discussion together. Thanks again for joining us. Really good to see you all here. Take care.
Thanks all.